You ever notice how millennials are exhausted, but not from doing nothing? They're tired from doing exactly what they were told would work. And that's the part nobody wants to talk about. Because burnout used to be something you earned after success. Now it's something you get just for surviving your 30s. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Millennials didn't burn out because they're weak. They burned out because the reward system was quietly removed while they were still playing the game. Psychologists call this effort-reward imbalance. When your brain puts in energy, sacrifice, discipline, but the payoff never arrives, and when that happens long enough, motivation doesn't disappear. It turns into resentment. Think about how millennials were trained. Work hard, say yes, hustle, be flexible, be grateful. So they did. They worked unpaid internships. They took entry-level jobs that demanded senior-level skills. They answered emails at 11 p.m. because that's just the culture. And what did that flexibility buy them? A job title that sounds impressive but pays rent-adjacent money. A calendar full of meetings that could have been emails. And the creeping suspicion that rest now feels unsafe. Because rest was never modelled as success. Millennials watch their parents grind towards something tangible. A house, a pension, a finish line. Millennials are grinding toward staying afloat. And your brain knows the difference. Neuroscience shows that humans can tolerate stress when it's finite and meaningful. But uncertainty with no clear endpoint, that's where burnout becomes existential. You're not tired from working. You're tired from not knowing if the work matters. And social media made this worse in a very specific way. Previous generations compared themselves to neighbours. Millennials compare themselves to highlight reels from people their age who somehow crack the code. Same education, same timing, wildly different outcomes. Which quietly teaches your nervous system a dangerous lesson. If I'm struggling, it must be personal, even when it's clearly structural. So millennials internalize systemic failure as individual inadequacy. They don't say, this economy's broken. They say, something must be wrong with me. That's not motivation. That's psychological erosion. And here's the twist nobody expects. Burnout doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like apathy disguised as maturity. You stop dreaming big, not because you don't want more, but because wanting more started to feel embarrassing. You tell yourself you're being realistic, but what you're actually doing is protecting yourself from hope, because hope became expensive. Millennials aren't lazy. They're conserving energy in a system that keeps moving the finish line. They didn't give up. They adapted. And if that adaptation looks like cynicism, humor, therapy jokes, or emotional detachment, that's not dysfunction. That's intelligence under pressure. If this felt uncomfortably accurate, you're not alone, and you're not broken. You're responding exactly how a human brain responds when the rules change mid-game and nobody bothers to explain it. Because burnout wasn't the final stage, it was just the warning light. What came next for millennials was something quieter and way harder to explain. It's called learned helplessness. Psychologists use this term when people stop trying not because they are incapable, but because experience taught them that effort doesn't change outcomes. And millennials didn't learn this in theory. They learned it in real life. They watched. Hard-working friends still struggle. Talented people get laid off. Promotions disappear. Housing prices run faster than salaries. Doing everything right still end in stress. So the brain adapts. Not by quitting entirely, but by lowering emotional investment. This is why so many millennials look functional from the outside but feel emotionally checked out on the inside. They show up, they do the job, they pay the bills. But the belief that life will meaningfully improve, that part went offline. And here's the part nobody talks about enough. Millennials didn't just lose money, they lost trust in timelines. Previous generations believed, if not now, then later. Millennials learned, later is not guaranteed. So they delay everything, not because they don't want it, but because committing to the future feels risky when the past kept pulling the rug out. Marriage gets delayed, kids get delayed, big dreams get delayed, not out of immaturity, out of pattern recognition. Your nervous system doesn't plan long-term when it's still trying to stabilize short-term. That's not fear. That's survival logic. And socially, this creates another psychological fracture. Millennials are constantly told, you're old enough to have it figured out, while simultaneously being treated like, you're too young to be taken seriously, too old for grace, too young for power, stuck in the middle with responsibility but without control. That's a recipe for quiet rage. Which explains the millennial sense of humour. Dark, self-deprecating, existential. Because humour became the safest outlet for truths that felt too heavy to say directly. Laughing at the absurdity before the absurdity laughs at you. And then there's identity. Millennials were raised to believe identity comes from achievement. But when achievements stop providing security, identity starts to feel hollow. So people pivot. They chase meaning, purpose, alignment, mental health, not because they're soft, but because when stability is gone, meaning becomes the last thing worth protecting. That's why millennials talk about burnout, boundaries, trauma, and healing more than any generation before them. They're not obsessed with feelings, they're trying to repair damage while still functioning. Let's be real for a second. Millennials are tired of being told, you just need to be more positive, because optimism without evidence feels like gaslighting. Hope isn't free anymore, it needs proof. So millennials become cautious dreamers. They still imagine better systems, better lives, better futures. They just don't fully trust them. And that tension, between wanting more and expecting less, is the emotional signature of this generation. If part 1 was about disappointment, part 2 is about adaptation, not collapse, not failure. Adaptation to a world that kept demanding flexibility without offering security in return. And the real question isn't, why are millennials like this? The real question is, what happens when an entire generation finally stops adapting and starts demanding systems that don't require psychological self-sacrifice just to survive? That part hasn't played out yet. Share your experience in the comments, and if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more psychology-based content. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.